Welcome to Get Unstuck, enhancing designer and developer collaboration for mutual success, which is our tagline, which we probably won't mention again. But we thank you a lot for coming. And I just wanted to take a quick poll here to see how many of you in the audience feel like you're stuck, and you're here because you feel like you're stuck. A strong yes. OK, so it seems like maybe a third of you. How many of you are here because you felt like unstuck was a provocative term and you're not quite sure what it means? Nobody? OK. No one? OK, a couple. And how many of you got sort of like the room change thing wrong and you're here by accident? OK. Well, we hope for you and for everyone here, we're going to have something to offer you today. I'm going to introduce the panel in a second. But before I do so, I wanted to give a little bit of background on what we're going to cover today, a little bit of ground rules on what you're going to see. So we're thinking that some of the questions we have up here are going to resonate with you. What we want to talk about today is maybe breaking free of old ways of thinking. Taking more risks as individuals and helping our clients take more risks. Trying to convince clients that what we're trying to do is beneficial to them and allowing them to trust us and helping them feel happy and comfortable in doing so. Stopping being in a rut and breaking this sort of process fatigue that we seem to go through by repeating the same thing over and over again, and working efficiently on purpose, not just by accident. And again, avoiding needless repetition. So we're going to talk about getting inspired, and getting inspired at just the right time, not just in the shower, not just in that late night meeting, but when you want to. And a theme at MIX right now is designers and developers working happily together. So we're going to try to talk about good ways of doing that as well. And of course, coming back to the big question, which is how do we get unstuck? So this photo. I don't know if any of you recognize a photo like this, if you've seen something like this before from where you are. But if you show a photo like this to a New Yorker, that New Yorker is going to say, wow, traffic looks pretty good today. It's all clear. But if you just go one state over to Pennsylvania and you show the same photo to a person in Pennsylvania, that person's going to say, this is a traffic jam. People are stuck, right? It's the quintessential stuck problem in this photo. Well, why is that? The reason that this perspective problem is present for that New Yorker and the Pennsylvanian is the same reason that your stuckedness is happening on your own team. So look at the photo again. Think about the different scales that are at work here. You have an individual who's in the back seat of the car. You have the driver of the taxi who's trying to negotiate the streets. You have the city problem, which is the groundwork that the city has laid, and there are cultural influences and so on and so on. Well, on an individual team, you as an individual might be stuck. You as your team of, say, developer and designer might be stuck. Your whole department may be stuck, or your company, maybe the entire discipline that you work in, all developers, all designers are stuck. So there are these different levels of stuckedness that are at work here that we have to negotiate and figure out how to get past. So for the purposes of discussion today, we wanted to talk about just one sliver of those definitions, because if we didn't, we would be here for the next 3 days. So for the purpose of today's discussion, we're going to talk about unstuck as being the act or process of doing good work, the act or process of being productive, and the act or process of feeling fulfilled on a team. And that last part, the on a team, is really important, because we're not going to talk about writer's block or how to get past writer's block, how to get unstuck from your own self. There are other places you can go for that, self-help sections in the library and so forth. But today, we're going to talk about individual personalities and individual relationships that you have on that team. So I wanted to remind you of one of the familiar ways we work on teams, which is classically known as the waterfall method. And the waterfall method is really comfortable for us, right? It's something that we've done for a long time, which is develop requirements, develop a structure, design the system, develop a system code, test, launch, and so on. Classically, the verbs that we use when talking about waterfall are throwing them over the wall, passing them on to the next person. The word collaborate doesn't come up much when you talk about waterfall. People have been talking a little bit about changing the waterfall method so that we're no longer doing this sort of sequential process, yet we're mixing it up a little bit, and we're doing things in a more agile and a quicker way that involves a lot of collaboration. What's important about this new way of working, we're going to talk in detail about this way of working, is that the users are developing the requirements. So it's no longer us sitting back, you know, sort of writing all the requirements and developing the system. And I'm generalizing, of course. But the users themselves are out there using the products early, using the beta, using the free trials, and telling us what the requirements are. And we're trying to catch up by looking at all the ways of working that are available to us. There are all these different methods that we can learn from seminars, from conferences like this, from books, different diagrams. And we heard a lot of these strategies in GK's presentation just before this on Design 3.0. But it's not as easy as that. It's not as easy as knowing what the right methodology is and implementing it. So if it's not that easy, what are we going to do? And that's why we're here today. This panel was put together by Kelly Goto, who I'll introduce in a moment. And she and the rest of the panel come from very different experiences, very different working relationships. This is a weird sort of way of talking about that, but going at full speed towards the same goal in different configurations of people and teams. And I wanted to introduce them and their different perspectives now. And we'll start with me. My name is Liz Danzico, and I'm the moderator. And my job here today is just to ask questions, and hopefully hard questions to the panel to my left. Luke, on the end there, is going to be our corporate monkey for today.
Hi, welcome. Anybody else in the corporate world out there? Am I the only monkey in the environment? Okay. All right, so I work as a senior principal over at Yahoo, dealing with product ideation and design. So I basically use a lot of design-centered thinking, artifacts, methods, skills, processes to help us figure out what opportunities are out there and how we can best kind of tackle them.
Chris Messina is going to be our open source hombre for today. Chris?
So I run a company called Citizen Agency with my wonderful partner, Tara. And before this, I worked at a browser startup called Flock. And before that, I worked on a project called Mozilla Firefox, Spread Firefox, sort of evangelizing the browser. I also co-founded a unconference event called Barcamp. And some of our friends are here today as well. Actually, just for a point of reference, my background's actually in communication design and so forth.
I didn't know that. Kelly Goto, creative director.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and I come from a long line of both corporate and also in-house being a creative director, and have a design agency now called Go to Media. And I struggle with taking my design team and trying to get them unstuck on a daily basis, and have for years and years and years. And so it's been an interesting transition between the 1.0 world to the 1.5 to the 2.0 world that we're in now. So.
And Christian, the integrator.
Hello, I'm Christian. I come from Sweden, and I woke up at 1 a.m. tonight. So I'm kind of in the mood of in transit between stuckiness and unstuckiness right now. I also lost my notebook with 50 pages of unstuckiness. I'm also a creative director at a company called Future Lab, and basically what I do is try to build brands and solutions that can handle frequent change over time or frequent change in context.
Great.
Great. So typically in this presentation like this, especially at the end of the day, right, you're kind of sitting there expecting to hear a panel discussion, and that you will. But also for you today, we're going to have an interactive session, or what we hope will be an interactive session, which means that all of you guys out there, especially the 1/3 of you who are here because you feel you're stuck, are going to have the opportunity to write down your stuck scenarios on index cards. And we have 2 volunteers on the side of the room who are going to be passing out index cards. So while we're here today discussing stuck scenarios and giving you a little bit of an overview of our different kind of roles, what I want you to do is write down a stuck scenario in 1 sentence or 2 sentences. And we're going to collect those in about 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to do something called the lightning round, which is this panel is going to have 1 minute to answer your questions. So this is your chance to ask this panel of experts any question you want about how to get unstuck, and they're going to have to answer it in a minute. It's going to be very exciting.
Dear Abby, done very quickly.
Exactly. Dear Abby or Car Talk, we're not sure which one. Okay, so the index cards are here by these women in red shirts. Here are a couple of examples of those index card questions. You know, all we do is have meetings, meetings, meetings. They never get us anywhere. Notice the question is missing because this person was limiting to 2 sentences. Remember that 2-sentence rule? How do we set strategic goals when senior management is micromanaging us? These are the kinds of questions. So please let us know your own, and we're going to be answering those soon. So while these guys are filling out the cards, I wanted to start with a few questions for you guys. And my first question has to do with process, right? So keeping in mind this stuck, unstuck kind of dichotomy, can you talk about your role in the organization or organizations you're in and what your process is like? Starting with Chris.
Sure. So, well, I guess I've done a lot of work with a lot of open source projects. Again, you know, Firefox or Drupal or things like that. You know, WordPress and so on. And I find that, actually, to sort of offer an anecdote, when I worked at Flock, one of the interesting things that happened there was I was director of experience. So I was doing a lot of design, a lot of like thinking of, you know, what this stuff should look like, what it should do. And there was a point in time when I was working there that all of a sudden we ended up getting a lot of funding, and I got really, really scared of actually working the way that I had worked before. When we were originally a small team of maybe 6 to 7 or 8 people, I felt really unstuck because I was able to put a lot of my work out there in the open, put mock-ups on Flickr, get a lot of community feedback and input. And once we had sort of like this goal overarching us to figure out a profitable model, I got really, really closed up and I think stuck. What I've realized since then, and what I try to do in all the projects that I work on, is to really get my work out there as fast as possible, to let other people see it, to push back on me, to give me their ideas, to tell me how stupid I am or how great this idea could be, and to give me some real world scenarios about why this is good or why it's not good. So I guess for me, the most important thing is really having a dialogue and using sort of a design dialogue and being open with my work.
Which I think is kind of carried over to this event. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that Microsoft calls this a 72-hour conversation, because I think there is a lot to that. The fact that you're here listening to other people talk about what they're doing and theoretically be open. I don't know if there's like a silver lining too hidden somewhere that Microsoft's not talking about, maybe. But you know, getting the information in and information out, to me, has always been a way of kind of maintaining a couple feet out of the muck, if you will. If you continue to kind of put your ideas out there, open yourself up to ideas via events, the blogosphere, news, magazines, colleagues, mentors, whatever, that kind of keeps the ideas flowing and has this open feedback loop where you get data in, data out, and gives you different ways of looking at things, especially if you move to areas you're not very familiar with. So in the corporate world, I always advise people, go talk to groups that have nothing to do with what you're doing, and you'll be amazed at the kinds of things that you actually can get done and learn about and find synthesis with.
And I think that just for, the tiniest bit of background is, I feel like I've been searching the world looking for people that are unstuck, going, what is the magic solution here? And I've been noticing that more and more there's smaller teams that are more agile, and they have the right tools in place, and they have the right platforms to build on. And meeting Kristen, actually, we met in Sweden last year, and he was developing on the .NET platform, and he was just explaining how fast his team can iterate and deploy. And he didn't even realize that it was different than what everyone else was doing. And I was like, you're unstuck, and you didn't even know you were unstuck. And it's just really exciting how there's so many tools and processes and things that we have at our reach, but it's a little overwhelming to know exactly what we're supposed to be using, how we make the decisions to actually use those tools. That's why hopefully we can give you some examples. We're just, sitting up here trying to give you some starting point to think about the concepts of getting unstuck yourself. So it's about that. It's about having tools and platforms and then having fun while you're doing it, really.
Talking about process, like you asked about, I think to keep it really, really simple and always in the heart of the process have the dialogue, like everyone here is talking about and Microsoft is doing as well. Because what I've been seeing in the, we're not unstuck all the time. We're really stuck sometimes. It's kind of your in-between. But sometimes you realize you're doing a project and you feel really unstuck. And what I've realized is that the common factor for us is we've been having like a really long dialogue with the client, within the team, before actually pulling the project off. So we know the context. we know the solution, we know what's the right thing to design, and to design the thing right. So dialogue, I think, is one of the keys for getting on.
So let me challenge you guys here as a corporate guy. You know, you're talking about small teams, and when you have a limited amount of choices, a smaller amount of choices, smaller amount of people, smaller realm of possibility, it's probably a little bit easier theoretically to figure out what to do and how to do it. What happens when you magnify that problem, and how difficult is it to have a conversation with a 10,000 person organization, a 500 person organization, or even a 50 person organization versus 8 to 10 people whittling away at, you know, Twitter or something like that?
I'd say think separation. Like, don't think systems. Chop it up and spread it out. Like, have like little pieces, like terrorists. They can work independently. No, it's true. Bruce Sterling at South by Southwest, actually, he made this ramble about how they function as a team. Like, they have this common goal, but they don't even know about each other, and they actually get, well, stupid things done. But I think, like, split everything up, separate it, and, you know, have a clear common goal.
So to offer a more positive example, and, you know, I meant sorry. Well, it's actually a very valid example, I should say. Again, sort of coming from and being involved with Barcamp, you know, we started this little event, this little unconference, which we documented on a wiki, out in the open, totally public sourced it, and what resulted in the last year and a half or so is that there's been over 100 events of these around the world, with very little interaction between each event, other than being able to go back and sort of see the documentation that each one has produced for its own benefit, sort of being able to model the behavior. There's a really good book, actually, that captured this phenomenon without even knowing about Barcamp, called The Starfish and the Spider. And what you're talking about, and actually the author, Ori Brockman, mentions the same example that you did, is that when you sort of, you know, with a spider, if you pull off its legs, eventually the thing's going to die. With a starfish, it's got enough of the DNA and raw materials in each little piece of it that you pull off a leg, it grows a whole new starfish. So if you're able to infuse your organization with enough autonomy and enough sort of the original sentiment of what you're trying to accomplish, and you have clear intentions and a purpose, I do think that seeding out control, sort of, you know, to answer your question, could be a way of getting past stuckness, of avoiding micromanagement and allowing things to just sort of happen. In some ways, as we say, embracing the chaos.
Yeah,
right,
so let me push the issue just a little further, because I think it's relevant here. What happens when those things need to be very connected? So, I mean, Barcamp, great example, terrorism, great example. The overarching goal really matters, and then you can go do some crazy stuff over here, here, and here, and it doesn't really matter if the pieces get connected into a gigantic system. Whereas within, you know, complex organizations where they have, like, I mean, let's fit Windows to Office to Live as a simple example, to all the underlying foundational systems that power that, plus the devices, plus the web, you know, all these things actually have to fit together. So the terrorists will have a bomb go off here, and maybe one go off here, but thank God, and you know, I literally thank God, they don't have bombs going off everywhere at the same time in a coordinated assault.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, Kristen and I, we talked about this a lot when we were in Barcelona. We decided to become unstuck by meeting in Barcelona. He flew in from Sweden, and I flew in from San Francisco. And as we were walking through the streets, we were talking about having a structure just to deal with corporate environments. Just as a background, one of the things I've been looking at is agile methodology, looking at the development side, going, okay, what's with extreme, you know, programming, what's with Agile Manifesto, and what are the principles behind that, and how can we as designers start to embrace this mentality of iteration? If you've heard of Scrum, Scrum starts to embrace that and starts to develop a process so that you can actually combine Agile with other means of project management. What we've done is put user-centered design principles on top of that, get a lot of user feedback, and then iterate the heck out of everything. And so we start thinking about it, culture and context and corporation on top, and then communication and tools and processes is tying these things together. And then at the bottom, you need to have a structure or a platform or a framework, if you want to get really technical about it, to be able to build on. And so if you think about the T or the I guess, that it starts to form, is you have to tie all those pieces together. And going into corporations, it is very painstaking. Sometimes it takes a long time because they've taken years to develop certain processes. So sometimes you start with smaller groups. Sometimes you have to get buy-in from the stakeholders and the CEOs and all that in order to understand fundamentally how things change. But generally, it starts from the bottom up, and you need to prove over and over and over how the agile method really does have a change effect for the organization. And so by proving your point over and over and over again in this way, you start to eventually get up to the top management, and they begin to see how you can change the process. But it does take time in a corporate environment.
Or you can just sort of bulldoze your way in there in the office and make some kind of big split. Let me actually bring up the thing about structure, and let's go back to another negative example here. So Andrew Hinton at ISO made a comparison between closed sort of hierarchical structures like the military, etc., and open, organic, emergent networks. And he said open, organic, emergent networks are like the AK-47. You can put any kind of bullet you want in it. It doesn't jam. And by the way, it kills 250,000 people a year and is responsible for just about every revolution out there these days. On the other side of the coin, these closed structural systems, which are expensive but very accurate, is the M16. You need a specific type of bullets, but it's very, very accurate. If you're a marksman, you can hit your target anywhere. So a lot of corporations are sort of structured on the hierarchical, closed, expensive, but very, very accurate system, whereas the AK-47 is this open, emergent, organic system, which isn't that accurate, but sometimes it's good enough. It's inexpensive. It's open. How does that sort of model what you... It seems like that's kind of what you guys are talking about, no?
War?
Or were I talking about guns?
Sometimes between design and development it is war, but you know, we're trying to merge those things.
I think what Chris said and what I said earlier, we're all agreeing on the dialogue. What Chris mentioned, also intention. And I think that many huge corporations don't have their intention like all the way out to all the people, so they don't know actually what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I think you need to be really clear with communication, and I don't think it has to be that hard. I'm still going to say chop it up and spread it out, and also use open source thinking in your company. I mean, within like the intranet, the communication, documentation.
So actually,
I don't think it has to be hard. It has to be open.
I think Kelly's made a valid point though, in that it does take time, and I think that there are a number of organizations, and I have to plead ignorance because I've never worked in a large corporation, fortunately or not, whichever your viewpoint is. But I do think that there's a lot of ossification that happens, like hardening of process and segmentation. And there's I think two interesting examples that I can offer here. One is I was talking to a friend of mine who was trying to work with a company to embrace wikis. And I never really understood, well, it's not that I never understood, but I never really thought about wiki culture until I realized that you really have to be egoless to really use wikis, because anybody can edit any given page. Literally, you are absolving yourself of ownership in some ways by allowing other people to come in and modify your work. Now, that's a really, really different type of attitude and approach than somebody working in a corporate environment where you're worried about, meeting certain goals or objectives or proving that you're actually making contributions to a team. All of a sudden, all you have is the change log to prove whether or not you've actually been doing things as opposed to a final document. And what was really interesting is that in this instance where this person was trying to wikify this, it was actually an open source organization, that the engineers and the marketing folks were corralled into the same wiki, and what was happening week after week was that the engineers would come in and overwrite all the marketing people's stuff, and then the marketing people would come back and overwrite all the engineer stuff and go back and forth because they didn't really understand this idea of, as it's sort of been mentioned, of collaboration, of actually working together towards a broader or longer term intention or goal. And I think being aware of that, sort of seeding out and making people understand, or helping them understand that it's no longer just about the individual, but about what can be achieved together. And yeah, through open source thinking, you can start moving an organization towards decalcification, I guess, in a sense.
Right, by giving them the right tools and empowering them as individuals
and the right
as well
attitude.
as
I think,
teams.
allowing for failure and embracing failure as part of your process.
So let me be ornery again for the last time, I promise. I just want to make sure that we take both sides in the coin, because don't get me wrong, I've been blogging for 4 years, do all the openness I can possibly do, but I do think, let me just give you guys some counterexamples. Do we feel the iPhone could have emerged in a very open, structured thing without that laser focus coming from the top and being sort of pushed down? And if you had taken the vision for the iPhone and turned it into a wiki, within Apple, what would you have gotten out? And one of the things that we can just sort of talk about is this notion of design as committee, and what makes corporate design oftentimes mediocre is this sniff and piss syndrome. You guys familiar with this? So if something comes across someone's desk and they leave their mark on it, otherwise they're providing no value for the company, right? And as this thing sort of progresses, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in the conference here, but
I think it's
I
okay.
am? All right, sniff and piss. But as it sort of goes down and everybody leaves their mark on it, or the core focus, that laser focus, that vision of either individual or a set group of individuals, does it become too mediocre to please everybody? Does it become too stretched out? Does it try to become everything to everybody? And again, don't get me wrong, I'm totally all for open, but there is that sort of balance.
I would actually absolutely agree with you. I think and to be maybe a little provocative, even as the open source guy, I think that open source right now sucks at design. I think it's really, really bad, and I do think that it's part of having multiple stakeholders. I think it's about risk mitigation in some ways, and open source does a really good job of imitating things that are already out there, proven in the wild, but they always miss some of the nuances. And I'd like to, I think that your challenge, I take it more as a challenge, is to figure out a way of sort of being open about design while also having a vision and being able to execute on it. Because I know from my own experience, again at Flock, I did have, in my head anyways, and communicating it was a different thing, a pretty clear vision of where I wanted the browser to go. And once we did open it up, and once we did start changing the browser that people were familiar with, instantly everyone was like, well, where's my bookmarks? Where's my 1986 browser? I want, my old browser back. And it's like, how do you actually innovate in a context like that where you're risk averse, change averse, and there's a lot of buy-in to, again, that ossification.
Yeah.
Before we continue, we have a quick question from the audience. Go ahead.
Austin.
Is that on? Can we turn the mic on from the audience?
All right.
Thank you.
We can see
Now you have to sing, yeah.
but we can't hear you.
Nothing.
All right.
That mic is stuck.
There you go.
There we go.
Otherwise, we'll just keep talking.
Hello. Wow. Okay. So I was actually going to answer the question you asked, I think. Apparently, the one laptop per child initiative really opened up a ton of its design and put out a wiki and had contributions from around the world to solve a bunch of the design challenges that they faced.
And now I understand it costs $175 instead of $100.
Well, the goal was 100 and they didn't make it, but probably within a couple years they'll get there. So.
Understood.
But there's a question about that actually, because I think in that particular example, we're talking about, I would think, primarily open source hardware, and engineering design, whereas a lot of these problems have already been solved. And the question that you're asking in terms of the iPhone, we've had phones for a long, long time. In fact, there is an open source phone called the Green Phone by Trolltech or something that kind of looks like your standard phone. I mean, it's got Linux or something on it, but regardless, they didn't really mess with the form factor. So I don't know what the answer is. I'd love to see a lot more people try open design and see what happens. But I do think that there's an interesting, from again an ego perspective, with design and designers and being relating to or thinking of your design as representing you. It's a very different thing than solving a coding problem or building better hardware.
But I also think we're talking about, on the one hand, open source, fully open source, and on the other hand, Apple. That's really, they're not shouting about what they're doing. But then we have like a phone company like O2 that actually brought in kids that designed, like they put up 3D designs on the net. No designers at all. They brought them in, had them do the phones, work with them. So they're out there looking for what the users are doing and bringing it into their business. And that's also an interesting thing.
But maybe there's a time and place for open and close. If you look at the trend right now with Apple iTunes, and we were talking about this, now it's going open.
Yeah.
It had to be closed for a while to get people to buy into a new model where they can control the experience in a way that people, okay, I want this, I understand how these pieces fit together. They wouldn't have gotten that with an open system out the gates because that experience could have gone any way, shape, or form. So they lock it in. Then when they get to a point where they have the right, whatever circumstances in the market or the right pressure, then they open it up and kind of create a new economy based off of it. And to your point about open source copying things, I think it's because that's the vision they have, right? So they're going to create, if you're going to create an open source email client, look at Outlook, right? There isn't anybody giving them a vision of what it could be and how it could be. And I would assume, you know, I've never tried to give a design vision to an open source community. I've given design visions to plenty of large development teams, and I know that it's not a simple thing, right? It's a continuous process of buy-in, of communication, of selling, of collaboration. It's arduous. It takes a long time, and you really need to keep your eye on the prize for, you know, a significant amount of time.
We have another question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this working? Hey. I wanted to comment on I felt like the bashing of corporate that seemed to be taking place up there. I work for a big company, top, Fortune 150. Our organization has moved to portfolio management. I don't know if you guys are really familiar with that theory, that you have scouting options, you have where you dip your toe into a market to find out if it's the right place to go. And then our development teams, and I run a development team of about 300 people, we've broken ourselves into smaller groups, and everybody is running Scrum. We have Scrum Masters. We're doing wikis all over the place. We're using SharePoint like there's no tomorrow, and it works. We're getting products out, we're putting things out, and then saying that the market's telling us, that doesn't work very well. So we're not spending huge amounts of money to get the products out before we get the feedback. So there are some good things happening in corporate America. We're all not just, what did you call it, pissing and sniffing around, and being the guy who pisses and sniffs.
He's actually your advocate.
Oh, okay.
It's actually in the opposite order.
Yeah.
You don't piss before you sniff.
Oh, okay.
Because that would be a
you
no-no.
sniff. I got you.
I would sniff first.
Maybe that's been my problem.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. But so I think there's some pretty innovative things that are happening, and I think we're, as a corporate guy, we're slowly getting the message that we have to change, and we can't micromanage everybody. We got to put the power to the people that are actually creating this stuff and make it happen.
And
Thanks.
that's great. Putting power to the people. I was just going to bring back the conversation, Apple, and even getting into Microsoft discussion. A lot of just talking to our colleagues, we've understood a lot about how things have changed over the past several years. And one of the biggest things that we've seen change in corporate culture is the level of communication that has been brought about by Robert Scoble and blogs and by sharing of information. So whether you're a closed corporation that has an open culture, and that gets into open thinking, you're able to share and distribute the balance of power, also empower small teams with the tools and the processes. I think we're all agreeing that you need to have a vision and a purpose, but that you need to be able to give small teams the ability to manage themselves. And there was one, bringing it back to the war, story is in Blink. There was a story about how they brought a general in that was retired, and he was brought in because he was renegade, and he, did kind of like red versus blue team, and he took it all offline and did not do any hierarchy. He self-empowered each group, and in that way, America learned how to deal with insurgents and terrorists and things like that, because we have to change the way we think, and that's what's happening in the design and development world, is we have to change the way we think. And Scrum, and thank you for bringing it up again, is one of the best methodologies that I've seen that actually takes a process that we can embrace at a large corporate level and an organizational level, yet gives power back to the people and allows you to think iteratively, to see what you can do in 24 hours, to see what you can do in 7 days or 3 weeks. And that's why Kristen's company, and we have some examples that we'll bring up of something that we tried to whip together in a week, what you can do if each person is thinking collaboratively, collectively towards a common goal.
Just want to remind the audience, if you are writing your stuck scenarios down, we're going to collect them in about 5 minutes. So, hey, panel. So I wanted to talk about this idea of selling design, right? We've talked a lot about when it's been successful, when it's not been successful in open cultures and closed cultures and in big companies and small. And so what I wanted to talk about was, this idea of selling that idea of whether it is right to be open or it is right to be somewhat closed or laser focused. How do you sell that idea when you yourself as a member of the team can see what's right? How do you start selling that either up or down?
We don't sell it before we know the client. We try to get to learn the client's context so we actually can contribute something. Like, we don't pitch.
Right.
That would be to lie, to say we can do something when we actually don't know the client. So basically, again, it's about a dialogue, but it's kind of hard to say to a client that we're not going to pitch you have to get to know us first. But then again, when we work with clients, we get the clients that we actually know we have a good relationship with and can create really good stuff. So
How do you identify like unstuck clients that you can work with?
we don't.
There are none.
I don't think we look for unstuck clients. We look for clients that are in contexts that are relevant for us, which basically means different contexts. So we can kind of, what do you say? I don't know this word, cross-fertilize from being in like banking, software.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I would take the opposite approach. I just basically we go in and people already recognize there's a problem. They're not exactly sure where it's stemming from, so you can begin to break it down and understand whether it's again a corporate or a cultural thing, whether it's a team and a process, whether it's a lack of communication or proper communication, or even getting into skill set or tools. And by interviewing all the different constituencies or groups or VPs or team leaders, and beginning to understand what the process they've gone through, what was working, what wasn't working the last time around, people are ready for change. And that's really why this session is so valuable and why the dialogue needs to continue, is because this is very relevant here and now, and everyone understands, at least most people understand, that there's a problem that needs to be solved, and how do we get there? So I think that this disconnect does exist between open and closed communities and small agile teams and large corporate organizations with 300 developers and things like that, and that as we continue this dialogue and we move from software to browser-based applications, and everything gets more agile even on the web, that's why we're all having this discussion, is we've taken very traditional methodologies and products, and we're now migrating them to something that people can execute on their own. It's almost like when Avid, people started being able to do stuff on their Macs at home. I mean, we're really shifting the whole context of what we do every single day, and our thinking needs to change as well. So people know they're stuck, so I don't have to convince them.
So let me build on that point you were saying. I would actually say you shouldn't sell any process. And amen, that Scrum is working for you. I've seen Scrum go very, very well, and I've seen Scrum go poorly. The saying basically is, Scrum is hell, I love it, because it surfaces all the issues via the daily stand-ups and the blockers. And so if you've got issues, they're going to bubble up to the surface, and sometimes that's not a pretty sight. But to your point that things are always in flux and always changing, there's a quote from Bruce Sterling where he says, human beings are in constant transition from cradle to grave. So any problem that involves human beings is a problem whose parameters are changing over time. What that means, there isn't a fixed solution for your process. To go to your client example, I bring this up several times. When I was at eBay, we had a large interactive design agency come and pitch us on doing some work for us. And they spent an hour and a half talking about their process and never really asked us any questions about what we were doing, how we were doing it. And so guess what? That we never called them back again, because they were like, here's our process, and this process is going to fix everything, and this is the way to do stuff. And, okay, well, how do you even know what we're trying to do or where we are or what the situation is? And this is why I guess I was ranting on the open versus closed thing. People tend to get really bipolar, and this is an artifact of human culture in general. Like, you have to be all open or you have to be all closed. So usually things happen in this giant fuzzy middle, right? And that's where the vast majority of things that work and get done happen. And so saying like this is the process and you need to go sell it, I think it's more along the lines of learning about what's happening. This is that open feedback loop, and adjusting and changing as you move through time and as you move through strategy and as you move through product and as you move through people to account for those circumstances. Because Scrum is not going to work for every team, and neither is open wiki-based communication, and neither is top-down hierarchical dictatorships like Mr. Jobs runs. So I think we need to acknowledge that fuzziness and sort of build out our toolkit so that we can, and by toolkit I mean a huge range of stuff.
Adapt to the context.
Yeah, adapt to the, that's right, adapt to the context, exactly.
So it's not one process or one methodology, it's a set of tools
Exactly.
that can actually adapt to the context.
Because as soon as you settle, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like as soon as you settle into this, that you're stuck by definition, right? Like here's the process. You've bounded yourself. You put yourself in a box.
We have another question from the audience.
Hi, thanks. This is a question for Kelly and Luke, if you have experience with this as well, specifically in the area of agile development. I mean, agile development was crafted for development teams, and in theory works very well for development organizations. And it seems that there's an inherent complexity when you try and bring together a design organization and a development organization, where design has kind of longer lead time in ethnographic work and generative user research and ideation and discovery that lead up to kind of all the knowledge generation before you can get into the actual work of doing design, which can turn into something which can be developed. So perhaps you have examples you can give us to how you've seen agile development be successful in an integrated design and development organization.
Well, I guess I have two parts to that. One is that we've really tried to embrace this concept of the hybrid designer, or you could say hybrid developer. And so you're trying to get people that have disciplines, both right and left brains, that understand that one does not exist without the other. And we could have a whole discussion on, does design matter and what does design mean anymore anyway. But I think Chris had a great point that he brought up at a session a couple weeks ago, where he said designers are solving problems. And some of those problems are visual problems. Some of those problems are interactive problems. Some of those problems are even technical problems. And we are now designing solutions, whether we're technically designers or developers. And Chris was a great point. And it's as a purposeful example of something, what we've tried to do is take agile methodology, which are 3-week sprints, taking some Scrum, discussion in there. And we've actually tried to integrate all the user testing and research into the process. So we have to start off with wireframes or some kind of working prototype that is somebody's take on what it needs to be. And then with one client 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, we iterated 7 times in 8 weeks with usability testing, bringing people in, actually interacting with the prototypes, redoing it from one day to the next, and working side by side with a Japanese client where their engineers were iterating. We were doing A/B testing right alongside each other. And so we were putting UI elements in as designers and also getting user feedback in on an almost daily basis, and it was very hard work. But we had to fit into a very short cycle because it was a product release. We didn't have the luxury of 4 to 6 or 8 months to do our upfront research like we normally would do. And so we have begun to integrate very tightly, and everyone needs to buy off on that. And in the end, our client said in broken English, that you've changed the way that we will do this from now on. And so it was really exciting.
To your broader point, I think an agile development methodology is that it is tied to development, so it is more along the lines of optimization and implementation, to use GK's model if any of you were in the session before. Whereas the stuff that gets more challenging to stick into that framework is the conceptualization and the idea generation component. And so what I've seen done is let's stick a phase 0 in front of the Scrum process and figure out what we're trying to build before we actually start building it via the Scrum. And that essentially is back to the waterfall, theoretically. You might be more iterative in your Scrum process once you actually get into implementation, but you still require a conceptualization phase to happen before it. Even if you layer that in and say the development team is kind of 2 weeks or 2 months behind the design and the product team, or conceptualizing, all you've done is taken a waterfall process and sort of stacked it on top of it itself. So I don't think agile development methodologies have yet really grasp, at least from what I've seen, maybe you guys have examples out there, have yet put their cusp around the ideation and the conceptualization phase and how to integrate that into a really rapid iteration system. Unless you're really prototyping broad business models and broad conceptual structures, which are actually pretty challenging to do. I know a lot of people will claim that they're doing rapid prototyping of business models, but that's an awful lot of shifting of consumer mindset and talking to your customers and your investors and your team. Like, okay, well, now we're going to try making our money this way. Oh, wait, 2 weeks are up Scrum. Now we're going to make our money this way. Oh, wait. And your customers walk away really confused. So you do need some sort of distinction between conceptualization and general and idea generation and then actual implementation and optimization of that. And by optimization, that's what I mean with those 2 week Scrums where you're testing things.
Yeah.
The usability testing, right testing, call it whatever you will. Right? So I don't have a clear answer for you how to bridge those two worlds and something that moves really fast and easy, but I do know that strategy is rooted in what's happening in the real world, and what's happening in the real world is changing all the time as well. So strategy is changing and shifting. Rapid iteration allows you to sort of adapt to that, but I don't know if Scrum is like the holy grail.
Well, I would say one more thing about that just quickly is that it's basically at the functional requirements stage, or you get the spec, and everyone calls it different things. Who owns that? And usually either the technical team owns it, or it starts off as a more of a conceptual model. And I think one of the things that I've seen that works really well is starting feature by feature, almost developing an object-oriented interface, and so you can address each component at a time. And by starting off with the key features from a user experience perspective, what do people want to do when they come to their site? If you're banking, you want to pay your bills, check your balance, you want to transfer money, and maybe one other thing, but you don't want to do the 20 thing the bank wants you to do. So let's start bringing down feature creep into something that's viable and usable by people, and start with that. And that in itself becomes more unstuck as an organization. So if you tend to bring it back from the user perspective, and then you build features and functional specifications based on the top features and break it down a la Scrum, create your backlog and really break it down. I think that's how we begin to move forward as an organization, is simplifying. Keep it simple.
But
Before you continue, I just wanted to remind the audience, if you do have those index cards filled out in your scenario, will you pass those cards to the aisle? And we'll have volunteers come around and pick those cards up and bring them up to the stage here.
Agile basically just means being able to move quickly, right? In a context. And we were talking about tools, adapting to context. I don't see why technology or development has to take longer or design has to take longer if you have the right platforms to build upon.
Right, exactly.
If you're in the right environment, in the right context, you have your platform, you have your tools. And I mean, technology, well, I'm not going to say in design and development because we're all designing solutions. Mm-hmm. So, but they're so powerful today, so we actually can, if we take the time to build those solid platforms, whether it's a brand platform, a communication platform, a technical platform, we can actually work with them in an agile way.
Mm-hmm. I find sometimes we become a little egocentric when we talk about design and development being fast and us being iterative. You know, business development, where's the rapid iteration of business development processes? Marketing. You can go build a great website and maybe you'll get some viral adoption, but you're going to need some traffic and you're going to need some eyeballs to it. And you're going to need some level of marketing that, communicating your message, etc. And, you know, there's not really much discussion and then legal and, you know, all these different structures that kind of come in to hone into what the actual product experience is going to be. Where are their rapid iteration cycle and how do you bring them into something like Scrum, etc.? You know, those are just sort of
you don't bring marketing in.
Maybe you shouldn't.
maybe you should. I don't know.
No.
Like, I mean, if you got a good marketing person and heck,
so
turn
let's
them
just
loose,
take.
right?
I guess Liz, is it okay if we take this question since he's been standing there?
Yep. One more question.
So maybe the baton toss, right where it goes from the creative designer to the technical developer. I mean, you know, we all want to be hybrid and all that, but there's a certain moment in time where the creative mind says, what's possible? And the developer mind says, what do I need to do now? That's that moment of truth, right, where we really do have to say, how much documentation do we have, how much time? That's where I see a lot of stuff just get stuck. So how do you get out of that moment of truth where it goes from possible to this way and we're done? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think we've been answering that in a way in that it's all about changing the way we address it. It's changing our attitude. It's changing the way that we communicate, because it is no longer the designer says this and then the technologist says this. It's about, okay, getting back to the user what they need and then figuring out what can be done within that time frame. That's why Scrum is successful in its own way, because it's a group of people sitting down for a time box period saying what can be done in that time period, and you all collectively agree on that. And that's why even smaller teams within a larger organizations are necessary. I can't have any more meetings with 20 developers in a room and everyone saying, oh, you can build an API for that, but I'm not going to take responsibility for the QA. It's a collaboration. Or if I hear refer to the spec, refer to the spec, refer to the spec one more time, I'll shoot myself. So everyone needs to change the way they're thinking about it. And there is no transition point in the new world, and we need to get there.
I would like to see people thinking about, I mean, working with the digital material compared to traditional materials. It's the most flexible in the world. And I really think we could take better advantage of that while in the processes. And what we do to try and answer your question in a way is we always have someone who focuses on the solution, because the project, whatever model you choose to go through with it, is just a tool. And when that project is done, that's actually the birth of the solution that's going to bring value to whatever you're doing, whatever your intention is. So try and always keep someone away from the project and focus on the solution in its context.
At a higher level, right.
Okay, thanks. So it's time for the lightning round. So just to remind you, this is the round where we're going to look at your questions for 1 minute. The panel up here will have just that single minute to answer your question, and then we're going to cut them off. So make sure that you can keep track of time as well. I'm going to go to the first question for the panel, and you guys feel free. You can all answer in 1 minute, or each, one of you can take the question yourself. So, first question: we've developed a technology that conceivably could affect every bit of digital content and provide value to a wide variety of customers. Wide variety. What ties could you provide to help us to get unstuck from being distracted by all this possibility?
Ooh, this is what we were talking about at lunch. Most people are now stuck because they have too many things that they could do versus too few things that they could do. It used to be you're in a box, we can only do 5 things. Now you're in a vast ocean swimming around and you can do 50 million things. And by the way, here comes a shark. I'm going to talk real fast because we only got 30 seconds. I think it comes down to being rooted in what's happening in the real world. And by the real world, I mean the market, I mean culture, and I mean people, and sort of looking for opportunities in that space. So however you can immerse yourself in that space and get outside of your awesome technology platform. I know it kicks ass, but...
Well, but it's also looking at the resources that you have, taking advantage of what you've got, and sometimes you just have to roll the dice and make a decision one way or the other.
And then looking at your audience and segmenting it properly and actually answering their needs, simplifying.
How can you get some more certainty about the way the dice are rolling since we're in Vegas?
Focus on the users.
Focus on the end users, absolutely.
55. Perfect. Next question. A group of designers are so kind that they don't speak up to each other or to their business counterparts. How would you light an innovation and vocalization spark under their seats?
So we've offered this thing at our office called Citizen Space in San Francisco called speaker training. And it might not be the exact thing, but I do think that there is a need for confidence as well as the ability to communicate with your peers in a respectful way where you're attacking the ideas and not the person. And I actually think that it's for the betterment, and you've got to come to a mutual understanding that it's like, we're creating something really great here. It's got to be the best work that's possible, and we're not going to get there if we keep our mouths shut.
Come on, we're talking about people that in school dealt with design critiques. If anybody should be able to actually have a positive discussion and talk about work and tear it down and build it back up, it should be designers. This is what we were trained in. This is how it works. I mean, if you can't deal with a crit type of environment.
One of my designers is originally from a different country. English is definitely not his first or second language. He's a brilliant designer, brilliant technologist, good hybrid. I put him in a room with our clients and left, and he was forced to talk. I had to leave, and I came back, and ever since then, he has been more vocal. He's said things in meetings.
Next question. Thanks, Kelly. We find ourselves constantly pushed to give a deadline. It's always forced early on.
So cut your product in half, in a quarter, do 5% of it. I know that's really hard to do, but if you have unreasonable deadlines, you've got to go, something's got to go.
Yeah, or something went wrong. Have a better exploration phase.
Yeah, what happened with
when you do the CYA part, you have to up front let them know that you're only going to be able to do this amount of time, this amount and this amount of time, and the 24-hour thing really works well. What are we going to accomplish today? What are we going to accomplish this week? And then you hit that, and then you're done.
Most deadlines are arbitrary. It's middle management trying to figure out what they should be doing within a corporation.
Or they're not arbitrary.
Or they're not arbitrary. I mean, most deadlines are arbitrarily set. Very few are, and the ones that are tied to we want to ship on this and this event, or we want to put things out this and this place because we think somebody's doing this and this. So get at the root of what's actually driving it and figure out how you can adjust to hit those goals within potentially a shorter amount of time if you don't have that available.
And then you split it up to 1.1, 1.2 releases. So, yeah.
Great. Next question. Managers have no technical background. Even waterfall would be a foreign term, never mind agile.
Will we read the first part again?
Managers, assumably this person's manager, have no technical background. So even waterfall would be a foreign term, never mind agile.
Training.
Quick, no.
Yes.
Boil it down to what are their goals again? I mean, same basic principle. What are you trying to achieve? And I guess I'm fortunate to work at Yahoo, where every team gets to figure out the process on their own. For some people, that's a blessing. For some people, that's a curse. But you can sort of build up something that helps you achieve those goals. And since those goals vary widely, your processes vary widely.
Yeah, and
Try dialogue.
Yeah, there needs to be an aha moment too, where sometimes somewhere that person will have this aha moment where they get it and they understand what they're supposed to be doing, and sometimes they don't ever get there.
Well, I think actually, like the Yahoo Hack Days and things like that have been really, really good for sort of inspiring this idea of just getting people together, solving somewhat arbitrary problems, and seeing what can be done. And
have Beck play in your quad.
Well, yeah, and then you get acquired. But yeah, it's a great demonstration of that idea of actually just doing things in 24 hours and seeing what can actually be done.
Great. So this is a question that's come up on a few cards, so it seems to be a common theme. How to deal with designers who constantly change the visuals, causing major reworking of code to support those new visuals. So that same question has been asked in a number of different ways here. What do you do?
Can you say it again?
Sure. How to deal with a designer who's constantly changing the visuals. Another question was, how do you deal with these, everlasting, rounds of visual design that keep going and going and going?
Have them use the expression suite so they can output XAML, and therefore you can just drop it into your program and wham, away you go.
Okay, next question. My clients constantly ask for improved user experience and usability, but enforce design standards to the contrary. How do we show them a better path?
Put their users in front of them and have them test it. And then if they're not figuring out that their users are basically not able to use the system and they're losing money because of it, I don't know how much you can actually get into their heads after that.
And we've worked a lot to educate internal teams, so we kind of sometimes do internal, external supplementation. So we'll work with them on a project or go in and train people on how to actually conduct usability testing on their own so they can integrate it quickly. And if they do that, then they're able to see the benefits right away. Even mock testing brings up all kinds of results.
Great. It's a question you may have answered before, but I'd like to hear the 1-minute summary. If designers and programmers are working in the same environment, is there any methodology for working together?
Is there any
Dialogue.
Is there any what for working together?
Methodology.
Methodology for getting designers and developers.
Clear intentions and constant dialogue.
And respect, absolute respect
Well, I
for
think
each other's
it
skill
also goes
set.
back to shared language and actually just getting into each other's heads a little bit. Finding a way of actually seeing what the problem is that you're trying to solve outside of geek speak or outside of design pretty pictures. Being able to respect each other's art forms as what it is, and knowing that you each have something to bring to the table, that you need each other. I think it's just the attitude that you have to have if you're going to be collaborative.
I want to know what happened before the baton was in a designer's hand and heading into and was about to get passed off to the developer, right?
Yeah, but
how did they train for that race? Did they work together to design like the box for the product of what
Small
the thing's going to be? How do, what was the stuff before that transition that happens?
this is going to take long list, but I think instead of focusing on the differences, focus on the common factors, and the common factors in that environment is the solution. And if everyone has the same vision of what the solution is,
I would
you can work towards that.
Focus on the problem. If everybody has the same vision of what the problem is, isn't that a bit more powerful than having
Well,
No,
the
vision
solution
is
the
good.
result.
Vision is good. And also small teams working together, creating dialogue. I do agree with that. Yeah, complementary skill sets. You have to look at the skill sets of the team and make sure that it's complementary, otherwise you can't do anything.
Okay, thanks. Next question. We have a ton of ideas to better our development processes. How do we have time to implement these ideas?
Small projects.
Same answer as before.
work faster.
Yeah. Even
Longer,
personal
yeah.
projects. I mean, someone came up and said, oh, I want to do a widget. I'm like, go for it. Totally go for it. And just start to
Didn't
integrate
Microsoft
that.
just solve that problem with the announcement this morning? Work faster.
That's right.
Okay, next question. Which is right, having a designer in each developer's team or having a UX or design team that works with all of the developer teams?
Sounds like a lot of work for the
Context.
UX.
Classic design answer, it depends. Depends on your context, depends on the type of people you have, depends on what you're building.
Depends on the resources you have. But I think the better way to think about it is more about, what resources do you need to solve the problem?
Absolutely. And getting back to either problem or
Or
solution.
what is the problem? But
Yeah.
the pendulum swings.
Yeah.
In every company, the pendulum swings. Matrix, centralized, and you're going to... I've
Well,
never seen it stop swinging.
And people like to self-identify themselves in many ways. And even though someone may be calling themselves a designer, they actually have quite a developer mentality. And so I think that the definitions need to change as well. So we're just talking about skill sets or ways of approaching a problem.
Yeah, the approaches.
Okay, great. So this is a person who's asking for frank advice. Metaphors aside, what 3 real-life suggestions can you offer to help designers and developers work with each other rather than against each other?
Work with?
3 real-life suggestions
For the last part?
Together.
for working
as opposed to
together.
against.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Sit next to each other.
Yeah, proximity, I was going to say.
Engage in something together other than making the product, and it can be related to the product. Ideally, it should be an activity that in some way has consequence on what that product means to the world in general and to you guys. So I mentioned this like design the box together thing, some form of, and then 3, to Chris's point about shared language, Samsung, outside of having the bonfire where they burned all their products in the warehouse and said this isn't quality, we're going to stand for quality. One of the things that I think that did really well, and this wasn't designer developer, this was product manager designer. They sent the product managers to design school, and they sent the designers to to business school. So they grew, and it wasn't that they started doing each other's jobs. It was that they understood, oh my gosh, so this is what this guy does.
Help people define their own problem and their own solution, and then give them the tools that they need. But more than that, it's based on, again, respect for each other. So you want to live in each other's world a little bit and understand that you're both going for the same goal. I mean, we've already said it, and like you said, chop it up, right?
Great. So last question. How do you sell user experience outside of your group without losing your job?
Outside what?
Outside of your group without losing your job.
It's
User experience should be everything, I believe.
Well, don't go around. I mean, if you mean design, don't run around and sell design. We made this mistake for years at a couple companies I was at. We'd run around and tell everybody, design is great, you should embrace design, and here's what design does, and this is the design process, blah, 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 blah. And no, they don't care. What they care is, I've got to do this. And if you come in there and you do this, and you use design processes, methodologies, skill sets, principles to achieve that, then all of a sudden they're going to get interested and be like, what did you just do there? What was that hand-wavy thing that all of a sudden this thing popped up and my solution emerged? And then you're going to engage them in a dialogue. So like deliver, don't sell, and then people will become interested.
It's a loaded question, but customer experience is proven over and over and over again to be as a basis for marketing, as a basis, for tying the entire organization together. It's a focus that you have from a contextual, cultural standpoint, and it proves itself over and over and over again. So huge, long conversation. Right?
Yeah, and I really
if
think
you have
to
if
show
you're
that
going to
you can...
lose your job if you say it, then I would not want to be in that company, honestly. If they can't, no, in that case, yeah, because if they can't understand how to embrace their end users, yeah.
Panel's final words is quit your job. Before we close for today, we wanted to talk about some of the things that the panel's been working on, because we did the same panel at South by Southwest this year, and since that time, that was just a month ago, or 5 weeks ago, the panel's been doing a lot of things to sort of answer some of these questions that we got from our last audience. So I thought I'd turn it over to you for a few seconds to talk about those things.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things, just quickly, you can just pull it up. Chris and I were sitting at this conference a couple weeks ago, and we were saying, wouldn't it be cool if instead of the cards and the running and all that, people could just Twitter their Unstuck comments up to us? And Chris was like, aha! And then he wrote down this sketch, and with the collaboration of some pretty cool people, they built StuckUnstuck.com.
Well, and in particular, it was Larry
go for it.
From Magnolia.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess
awesome.
Yeah,
I did very little. I did this much. I helped start the concept.
Okay. So to carry that story, basically we were at Web2 Expo, chatting about this. There was the whole environmental thing, like, oh man, it sucks that we have to use these cards and so on. The other part was, well, how do we take this forward? How do we allow people to sort of find each other around these issues and then help each other solve these problems?
Because it's a discussion that we want to continue. We really feel it's valid now, and it's going to be valid for years to come.
So we were, sitting around this table, and we decided, okay, well, here's the basic, literally had a card about this size, drew down a quick mock-up. We're like, all right, let's go build this. And so it took us about, well, maybe in total a day or two, maybe a little bit more, maybe like 3 days, working together, doing designs actually in Basecamp, and I posted, so first I think you did design, and then I took that design, which I screenshotted and then marked up, posted it to Flickr so that anybody could see it and offer comments and feedback. Then I took some of that design and then I changed it around a little bit more, took that design that had only been in Photoshop, started doing the code for it. Meanwhile, Larry, who I was talking to mostly over IM, started coding the thing in Rails. And between like yesterday or Saturday and now, we've got a fully functional prototype. So
with limited features right now, it's just
very
the
limited.
beginning. It's very, very limited. But the purpose is to get feedback and eventually turn this into a threaded discussion group, or start to take like with like and put them together and really understand why and how we're feeling stuck these days, and what we need, more importantly almost, what we need to feel unstuck. And that's been really interesting to see what people are putting out there. Being fearless is a big thing, making sure that you have the freedom to do what you want to do, making sure you have the support to do what you want to do. I mean, everyone's context is different, but it's been really interesting to see what people have already begun to enter into the URL.
So let's see, hopefully this will work. Okay, good. So I'm logging in with OpenID. There was sessions about OpenID earlier. You can see why this is actually cool, because I didn't actually have to create a new account. I just use my OpenID. Now I'm logged in. I can go and I can say, you know, and add it in and so on, blah, blah, blah. Great. What's also really interesting is if you are a Twitter user, you can log into the site, and I've already done this, but you can go to your account and you can claim your Twitter account. If you claim your Twitter account, there are 2 Twitter accounts. One is Stuck and the other is Unstuck. When you claim your account, they will add you as a friend, and then you go back and add them as a friend. And if you send them direct messages, your statuses will show up on the homepage. And so literally, again, this is something that we just put together in just about 24 hours total to sort of demonstrate this concept and eventually build out, whoops, okay, the functionality for solving these problems.
And hopefully it will continue and we can get other people to donate their time and actually take the content that right now we're gathering and put it into a discussion-oriented format so that we can easily find solutions to the questions that we have, or put it out there for other people to answer and get some really great feedback and spark some ways of changing the culture, because the old culture and change management came from the top down and the new culture is from the bottom up.
Right.
And we really believe that by starting this discussion and maintaining it, that we're going to get somewhere as a group.
And we will continue the dialogue.
Absolutely.
Here tomorrow.
Yeah,
as
oh,
well.
that's right. Tomorrow morning, if you guys wake up and you're not partying too late, Kristen and I are breaking off into some really specific, processes or toolkits and some case studies that we're going to get a lot more in-depth into actual hands-on real-world situations.
Yeah.
And so please join us for sure.
We just did an Unstuck project with Microsoft, which was really, really fun and a great experience. We'll talk about it tomorrow.
It's pretty amazing.
Great. And so to wrap up, I want to ask the panel to give us one thing to walk out of this room with, one piece of advice of all the things we've heard today on how to get unstuck. So try to keep it to 30 seconds or so, if you could.
For me, I guess I go back to the original thing that I started with, and that's that if you can, err on the side of being as open as possible, as soon as possible, get things out there, talk to people, get outside of your own little bubble sphere, and I need to do this probably more myself, but get out there and just do things.
Yeah, I'm going to continue on that. I was listening to Malcolm McLaren, who founded Punk and the Sex Pistols last year, and he said it's better to be a flamboyant failure than a mediocre success. So just try things and allow for the guys you work with to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. Dare making mistakes.
Absolutely, and be constantly curious is mine.
I'm going to use a rock metaphor as well. Carlos Santana says that his audience is a sea of flowers, so he tries to make himself the best fire hose he possibly can, which means kind of turning yourself into a vessel for ideas to flow out of and into, and sort of create a virtuous cycle around. And I think that's a powerful metaphor for thinking about being unstuck.
Yeah. Great. I want to thank MIX. I want to thank our volunteers in the audience for collecting the index cards, for you guys putting these down, and thanks to the panel.